Incredible disaster. A panel of experts in Japan releases a report on the accident at Fukushima Daiichi, saying human error led to the crisis at the nuclear plant. Welcome to NHK World Newsline. Members of a Diet-appointed panel have spent months going over what went wrong before, during, and after an earthquake and tsunami hit Fukushima Daiichi. Their main conclusion, the crisis at the nuclear plant was man-made.
The report says communication between Council Office, TEPCO, and nuclear regulators was unimaginably disorganized. They didn't use technology that would have enabled them to talk in real time. And the experts say the lack of communication caused the Prime Minister to fly to Fukushima Daiichi to check on the emergency response. But they point out that this unprecedented and direct intervention took away the attention and time of on-site staff and confused the chain of command. The panel says this delayed the disaster prevention process.
Okay, very good afternoon, sir, and my fellow classmates. Okay, today we're sharing a case study on the nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan. Okay, firstly, I would like to ask you all a question. So, have you all heard of the telephone line game, where you pass a message from party 1 to party 10 without breaking in disorder? Anyone? Yes. Okay, that's good. So, this gentleman here, have you managed to ever pass the message across? Okay, that's right. It's very hard to pass a message across. Okay, so this presentation will be describing to you this scene. Okay, for this presentation, our presenters will be followed myself, Kenneth, Sheng, Eugene, and Gabriel. Okay, so the Fukushima incident happened on 11 March 2011, 3 years ago. It was a chain reaction. Firstly, it occurred by an earthquake, which was a 9.0 magnitude, which led to a tsunami, which was 45 feet in height. Okay, for this disaster, it incurred to 29 deaths within the first 2 months of the incident. Approximately 300,000 people was affected by it. Okay, you can see from this diagram, a 30 km evacuation radius was also made with 2 different severity levels, the red and the yellow. And secondly, a radiation plume was spread all the way to Canada, as you can see from here, within the first 10 days of the incident. Okay, so this will be some abbreviations that we'll be using for these slides. Example, TEPCO, former PM, current PM, TEPCO CEO, TEPCO plant manager, and SPD. Okay, my team and I will be here sharing with you some key pointers relating to these incidents. Firstly, will be by me, using this red region, followed by Sheng in this green region, Eugene in the orange region, and Gabriel lastly in the blue region. Okay, so for the first key issue, it happened between the government itself, between the Education Ministry and the PM office. So the Education Ministry was in charge of the SPD. SPD, what does it mean? It was meant as a data measuring the radiation dosage in a nuclear plant for the safety of the citizens. And it was meant to pass, the Education Ministry was meant to pass it on to the PM office, but it did not happen. So why did it not happen? It did not happen because the Education Ministry claims that the radiation sensors were destroyed by the tsunami over the process, and as a result, radiation plume was not being measured. Okay, so from this hiding out the facts, the Education Ministry was trying to cover itself by protecting its own problems and not taking any form of responsibility to this issue. So it's clearly an avoidance issue. Okay, as I'm sure most of you in this crowd here know that Japan has a very precise train arrival system where they arrive on time, on the dot. So it's the same for this crisis. If the Education Ministry did not have any accurate or reliable data, they will not share with the relevant parties over here. So it resulted in a 1 week delay whereby only after 1 week the PM office knows that the data even existed. And in the following week, the PM office only had a chance to elaborate the data and pass it on to the citizen, where Eugene will be elaborating later on. Okay, so some solutions. So a short-term solution, we all feel that communication is a very, we feel that if there's no communication, it's not called communicating at all. So even though the data is irrelevant, they should be passing on to the PM office. And lastly, there should be a long-term goal. The long-term goal will be having a standard procedure, whereby they pass from party 1 all the way to party 2, for example, the PM office for the evaluation of data. And next, I'll hand over my presentation to Richard, who will be explaining to you more.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. Good morning all again. I'm Sheng, and this is the part I'll be covering as stated earlier by Kenneth. Okay, so the conflict that takes place between the Prime Minister as well as the TEPCO authorities, as well as another conflict taking place internally within the TEPCO plant manager as well as the CEO. Okay, so let's talk about the first conflict. So the first conflict between Prime Minister and the TEPCO CEO. So the difference is because both of them have a different concept of the goal that they want to achieve. The former Prime Minister wants to know the truth of what is going on in the nuclear reactor plant, in particular to the Unit 1 of the reactor system, because there's speculation that the reactor system is overheating and there's a possibility of having a meltdown. However, that's not the same idea for the TEPCO CEO. He believes that he can try to undermine the situation and not let the PM know about the seriousness of it, because he can take things in his own hands. So as a result, the conflict in this case is the withholding of key information within the two parties. So this is what happened. The TEPCO CEO actually mentioned to his plant manager to just carry on using a cooling system from the sea to actually cool the reactor system first, without actually letting the Prime Minister know what is going on. So in fact, what happened is that the Prime Minister is kept in the dark and did not know what is going on site. Okay, so what is the conflict response between the two parties? The TEPCO CEO used the avoidance stance when handling this conflict. So what do we mean by avoidance? He downplayed the seriousness of it, assuring that the PM that everything is under control. However, internally he's trying to solve the problem himself. Okay, so by avoiding a head-on conflict with the Prime Minister, he used the avoiding stance. For the former Prime Minister, what he did was a competing stance, because he aggressively tried to find out information from the TEPCO CEO, who is hiding the information from the Prime Minister. So what the Prime Minister did was that he went down on site personally, giving only 2 hours before, only giving 2 hours notice before going down on site to take a look at what was actually going on. Okay, so what is the consequences of this conflict? The consequences of this conflict is that there will be strained relationship between the two parties, as well as delay in decision making that will ultimately affect a bigger party. So what do you think is the ultimate people that will be affected by this decision making? Anyone from the floor?
The Japanese people?
Okay, so ultimately, because of the indecisiveness of the authorities to handle this conflict, of course, the Japanese people will be the ones that's affected, because there's a need for them to relocate to get away from the leakage of the radiation. Okay, the second problem that takes place is the internal conflict between the TEPCO CEO and the TEPCO plant manager. This is because of a lack of communication within the hierarchy structure. Okay, after finding out that actually the Prime Minister is against the seawater cooling method, the TEPCO CEO tried to immediately stop the process so as to prevent himself from getting into trouble. Thus, he immediately told his plant manager to cut the cooling process. However, the plant manager himself, who is a technical expert in the nuclear reactor system, do not think the same as his CEO. He believed that by cutting down the cooling process would mean the death of his workers currently working in the plant. So this is the second conflict, which is a difference in the ideology of the two of them. Okay, the conflict response in this case is that the CEO adopted the competing response, because he was very aggressive in telling them to shut off the nuclear reactor immediately. However, the plant manager also has his combating stand, because he did not listen to the TEPCO CEO and instead went ahead to do the cooling system. He also did the avoidance stand, because what he did was he did it secretly without the knowledge of the TEPCO CEO. consequences in this case it happened that the plant manager did the right decision to continue the cooling process, and it turned out to be a national hero for the country. However, this kind of undiscussed decision made is actually very risky, and it also further strained the relation between the two of them. So in conclusion, the solutions to actually effectively solve this kind of communication will be as follows. Firstly, we should mend broken communication chain. Leaders and authorities have to be transparent in their decision making so as to provide a common goal and to solve the big picture. Now I'll pass on the time to Eugene who will elaborate more. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheng. Good afternoon, Mr. Maddy and fellow students. I'm Eugene, and next I'll be going into the conflict management between the government and the citizens at the time of incident. Living in a peaceful country like Singapore, it's difficult for us to imagine what it's like to live in a country torn by man-made and natural disaster. However, I urge you guys now to picture yourself as a Japanese citizen living in Fukushima and facing the communication problems with the government. Across the ring, you have the government, consisting of the pro-nuclear bureaucrats and the Prime Minister's office. Your first battle is with the pro-nuclear bureaucrats. You're surrounded by the chaos from the tsunami, and every day you are seeing plumes rising from the nuclear plant. All you want is for the government to be honest about what is happening at the plant. However, that's not going to happen. This is because the pro-nuclear bureaucrats have a hidden agenda, and that is to secure their position as a highly paid executive at TEPCO after retiring from the office. And to do so, they have to prevent any criticism or public questioning from the citizens, which is you guys. Because the stance they've taken was avoidance. Without providing you guys with any information of the incident at the nuclear plant, you guys simply do not know what is there to criticize about. Your next battle is with the PM's office. Every day, you're hearing nuclear explosions at the plant. However, you think to yourself, by now the government should have some results as to where the spread of the nuclear radiation is now. And you're right. The Prime Minister's office do have this data, which is called the SPEEDY. However, they will not disclose this data. This is because they have their own goals in mind. The first goal is to minimize the cost of enlarging the evacuation zone. And secondly, no ministry wants to take on the responsibility of using the SPEEDY data which they claim to be inaccurate. So, you guys are the citizens now. How will you feel if your government reacts this way? Ricky?
If the government not going to help us, then we're going to help us.
Correct. That is what most of the citizens did. So citizens living around Fukushima decided to do their own research and look into foreign media reports on what is happening at the nuclear plant. What they found was the possibility of a nuclear meltdown. This worried the citizens, and the consequence is they decide to flee north, thinking that winter winds are blowing south. However, they do not know that they are running right into the radiation plume, which was shown by the SPEEDY data. So how can we prevent this consequence? It is simply through better communication from the government. The government should adopt an open, clear and honest communication with the citizens. But openly sharing that the SPEEDY data might not be 100% accurate, it will prevent any backlash from the possible backlash from the citizens in the future. With that, I end my side of the presentation. I'll pass on the time to Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. I will now talk about the current conflicts faced between Prime Minister's office and the citizens. So, following the disaster, Japan has shut down all its nuclear reactors. However, in the recent months, it was announced that there are plans to restart 2 reactors in the Sendai nuclear plant. This was a huge U-turn from the stance of the former Prime Minister, who was committed to ending nuclear power in Japan by 2040. The change in leadership to the current Prime Minister has caused has resulted in a new energy plan being proposed. As a result, the citizens responded by adopting a competing approach, such as holding protests and lawsuits against nuclear power. In a recent survey conducted, nearly 2/3 of the citizens have opposing the idea of restarting the reactors. In order to push through his policy, the current Prime Minister also adopted a competing response mode. Among the 5 officials at the Nuclear Regulation Authority, he replaced 2 of them, who are actually experts responsible for setting higher requirements for reopening of nuclear plants. The competing approach taken by both parties has resulted in increased distrust in the leaders of the countries, as they have rescinded on the no nuclear policy. Restoration work still ongoing, and many people still displaced from their homes. It seems that the government was placing their priorities on the economy rather than the safety and welfare of the citizens. To restore this conflict, the government has to be transparent in their policies and adopt a participatory approach in which the citizens join in the decision-making process. This can help to rebuild public trust so that both parties know what the concerns of each other's are. I will now move on to the conflict between Japan and the countries that provided foreign aid, in particular the USA. The US was eager to get information of the situation during the crisis so that they can provide immediate help to Japan. They relied on the defense and security alliance between the 2 countries. However, this proved to be a wrong channel of crisis communication, as Japan engaged its crisis management team rather than its defense department in this incident. The US government also requested that one of its officials to be stationed at the Prime Minister office, but the Japanese was against this idea. Both parties adopted a competing approach at first, with the differences in culture and crisis management principles further increasing the conflict. However, thankfully, this tense situation was resolved when the bilateral conference was held every evening, in which the 2 countries can collaborate and speak in one voice. From this cooperation, we learned that extensive communication and information sharing channels should be established to understand the intentions, expectations, priorities, and differences in practice. In conclusion, our group has covered the main conflicts that arose during the Fukushima nuclear disaster. In all cases, it is obvious that a lack of effective communication has resulted in the hindrance of crisis management. Therefore, it is important that for all parties involved, a common communication channel is established so that the detrimental effects from time wasting can be reduced. Now, we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions from Tom? Yeah.
What are the reasons why the Prime Minister does not support the idea of the seawater method?
Okay, the seawater method is a possible solution to cool the reactor from being overheated. Okay, so think about it this way: if you actually use the seawater to cool the overheated reactor, what's happening is actually you are contaminating the seawater with the radiation. So the alternative is not doing it, okay, and that will result in overheating and eventually to explosion. So the dilemma between using seawater or not using seawater is whether they can find an alternative method to clean or not. However, there was a lack of communication between these two parties. So as a result, one party chose to just use the seawater instead of letting the Prime Minister.